you hated, filthy infatuated.
Get this shit.
I'm tying my shoes up super tight. My man got the gun on him. He like, yo, I'm a pop. I never liked Tupac until I like songs like Keep It.
Prodigy had many feuds. In hip-hop, that is almost unavoidable. Rap is collision. It is competition. It is egos crashing straight into each other. But Prodigy was different. Prodigy never feared anything. He was willing to challenge death row records. He dared to point straight at rappers he considered useless, and talentless people he believed were borrowing rap as a pawn. Behind the scenes, word spread that to work with Prodigy money was not enough. Even a lot of money was still not enough. To stand in the same room with him, you had to understand the unspoken rules. And most importantly, you had to know the 6 names that could never be mentioned. One slip of the tongue, and the door would close forever. 6 names, 6 grudges, 6 vows Prodigy once spoke and never took back. Do not look away. From this moment on, each one will be dragged out in front of you. The first name. Jay-Z, the greatest enemy of Prodigy's life. It all began in the mid-1990s, right in the middle of the East Coast-West Coast War. Mobb Deep had just released the classic album The Infamous in 1995, and were dominating New York's underground scene when they were pulled into the coastal conflict alongside the beef between Bad Boy Records on the East Coast and Death Row Records on the West Coast. Prodigy and Havoc of Mobb Deep felt they had to defend their side after being insulted by the New York music video from Dog Pound, a West Coast rap group signed to Death Row. In that video, they smashed up New York buildings as if insulting the entire city. There was no way to see that as harmless entertainment. So in response, Mobb Deep released the diss track LA, sending a signal to the West Coast that the East Coast was not soft, that they were standing firm and ready to fight. Then Tupac died on September 13, 1996. A few months later, on March 9, 1997, Biggie followed. The 2 biggest faces of hip-hop were removed from the game, and suddenly, the throne was empty. Jay at that time was not yet the massive icon he is today. Meanwhile, Mobb Deep were gaining even more respect, especially on the East Coast for having held New York during the Coastal War. They had released 3 albums, 2 of which were considered classics, The Infamous and Hell on Earth. In terms of respect and impact, Jay was not yet on Prodigy's level. Jay quickly released In My Lifetime Volume 1 in 1997, with tracks like The City Is Mine essentially declaring that New York now belonged to him after Biggie's death. That was something Prodigy and Nas naturally looked down on at first. They underestimated Jay, seeing him as a small-time player, but they quickly changed their minds when Jay grew at an alarming speed, becoming a real threat step by step. There was a subtle jab that Prodigy did not notice at the time hidden in Where I'm From on Volume 1, with a line aimed at Mobb Deep that roughly said, "I'm from the place you and your man keep talking about in every rhyme." Back then it sounded harmless. But was it really harmless? The peak came with Tru Life. Jay stood with a crowd of neighborhood people behind him, almost identical to the style of Mobb Deep's Shook Ones video. It felt like a direct face-off. Prodigy's block versus Jay's block. Jay even deliberately wore a red football jersey, similar to what Prodigy wore in Shook Ones, even though that was never Jay's style. That was Mobb Deep's style. Jay copied it to prove that he could do that style too, maybe even do it better. At the time, Prodigy did not realize Jay was taking shots at him. It was only later during time in the studio talking with Nas that he began to notice and realize Jay was aiming at him. Once he saw it all, the old details suddenly came together into a different picture. The climax arrived. Summer Jam 2001 happened, and every boundary collapsed. On the Hot 97 stage, Jay-Z performed Takeover, a verse aimed straight at Mobb Deep. "I don't care if you Mobb Deep, I hold triggers to cruise. When I was pushing weight back in '88, you was a ballerina. I got the pictures, I seen ya." Right after the line, "I got the pictures, I seen ya." Jay had the Summer Jam screen show a childhood photo of Prodigy wearing a dance costume from the studio, where his grandmother taught dance looking like a Michael Jackson fan. And the entire stadium exploded. Screaming, laughter, mockery. Many people believe Jay ended Mobb Deep's career with those pictures. But Prodigy insisted it had no effect on him at all. that Jay did not know who he really was in real life. He said that. But was Prodigy truly untouched by it? This was a brutally public humiliation, shattering Prodigy's street-cold image in front of tens of thousands of New York fans. He responded almost immediately. He fired back on the album Infamy. The tracks Crawlin' and The Learning Burn contained many diss lines aimed at Jay-Z, calling Hov a homo rapper, and criticizing Jay for using childhood photos instead of facing him directly. However, the pressure of time was real. If they did not rush the release within the same year, and waited until the next year, it would be too late, and people would treat it as if nothing happened. The clock was ticking. The year was ending. The hip-hop world was waiting for Mobb Deep's response before the new year. At the same time, Prodigy was dealing with personal issues. He was struggling with alcohol and drug addiction. The beef did not make him stronger. It wore him down. Creativity disappeared. The album felt rushed. A very bad look. Especially since throughout that period, Prodigy had always said sales did not matter, that skill, lyrics, and musical quality were what counted. The result was a project whose quality did not match Takeover, and that intentionally or not led fans to rate Jay-Z more highly. The feud between Prodigy and Jay-Z had many layers, because even after going to prison, Prodigy wrote a letter titled, "My First Moment of Clarity," mirroring Jay-Z's Moment of Clarity on the Black Album. That title was not accidental. In the letter, Prodigy did not accuse Jay-Z of covering up a specific crime or case, but he believed Jay-Z understood exactly how the power system operated and understood it very well. And instead of confronting it, he chose silence. He chose to stand with it in order to succeed. In his memoir, My Infamous Life, Prodigy recounts that after Summer Jam, he and the Queensbridge crew surrounded Jay-Z at Diddy's restaurant Justin's, not to talk. According to P, he brought many people had guns and could have ordered his crew to handle Jay-Z. In that moment, rap was unnecessary. A stage was unnecessary. One nod would have ended everything. And for Prodigy, from that moment on, this was no longer about music. It was a sentence of honor. It can be said that Jay-Z was Prodigy's sworn enemy. But ironically, that was still not the greatest danger of Prodigy's life. The second war would be true hell. A real gangster, with eyes glazed over from smoke. Tupac, a clash of ideology and ego. If the feud with Jay-Z was a story about honor and power, then the feud with Tupac made Prodigy hate in a different way. Not loud, not theatrical, but far deeper and far more persistent. It all started with a rap line that seemed harmless. In the hook of Survival of the Fittest in 1995, Prodigy rapped "Thug life, we still live in it." To Prodigy, it was just street language, a phrase describing the life he lived every day. But when that line reached Tupac, it stopped being shared hip-hop language. It became a question of ownership. Really, Pac was in prison. On his stomach were the words, "Thug life." Not just a tattoo. It was a brand, a philosophy, a declaration of life. When the Outlaws reported that lyric back to him, Pac saw it as an intrusion. And for Prodigy, that moment marked something very clear. Pac did not listen to music like a rapper. Pac listened like a territorial defender, or more accurately, like someone who could not accept anyone touching his ego. Prodigy became irritated from that point on, not because of fear, but because he hated the idea that one person could claim ownership over street language. Who do the streets belong to? One person alone. In 1996, Hit 'Em Up was released. Pac directly named Mobb Deep. But what truly fueled Prodigy's hatred was not the diss itself. It was that Pac dragged his congenital sickle cell disease into the insult, a condition that caused Prodigy pain his entire life, something he did not choose, did not show off, did not use to build an image, and never wanted turned into a weapon. For Prodigy, this was where every line was crossed. Dissing skills was part of rap. Using illness to attack was something else. That was no longer music. That was intentional harm and uncontrolled rage. Pac continued to mention Mobb Deep in Against All Odds, and then Bomb First. In the eyes of West Coast fans, Mobb Deep gradually became labeled as enemies. But inside Prodigy, the emotion was not explosive anger. It was a coldness, a quiet contempt for the way Pac chose to strike. Fast, deep, without thinking about consequences. Mobb Deep responded with "Drop a Gem on 'em" on Hell on Earth, a cold, sarcastic track that went straight at Pac's image. But Prodigy deliberately avoided mentioning illness. He attacked the persona Pac had built in public. That was a conscious choice. A moral boundary Prodigy refused to cross even after being dragged there himself. When Pac was shot and killed in Las Vegas, Mobb Deep voluntarily pulled "Drop a Gem on 'em" from radio. No one forced them. No one asked. Prodigy understood that hatred could exist, but death was where everything had to stop. The two never met in real life. There was no chance for dialogue, no moment of resolution. The feud ended in silence and death. Ironically, this very beef helped spread Mobb Deep's name across the entire United States. Prodigy never wanted to use Tupac's brand as a market strategy, but Tupac was too sensitive in this situation. The beef ended, but it remains a costly lesson about the fragile boundary between inspiration and biting in the brutal world of hip-hop. Keith Murray, the knockout punch. The feud between Prodigy and Keith Murray did not begin with guns. It began with contempt. A kind of contempt very typical of Prodigy. Cold, direct, and completely unconcerned with whether the listener liked it or not. Why care if what he saw was fake? In 1995, on the skit, the infamous prelude from the album The Infamous Prodigy spoke plainly. No metaphor, no dodging. He criticized rappers who talked all day about smoking weed floating through space, rapping that kind of space shit that had nothing to do with real life. He ended it bluntly. You are not real. Just talking nonsense. In the New York context at that time, no one needed to say names for people to know who he meant. The hip-hop community heard it and knew. That was Def Squad. And more specifically, Keith Murray and Redman. Rappers famous for interplanetary imagery cartoon language and humor. Fun to listen to. But to Prodigy, it was a joke. To Prodigy, it was fake rap. To Keith Murray, it was a public insult. No further explanation needed. Keith and Redman showed their displeasure. The two sides ran into each other during a video shoot. The tension was temporarily smoothed over. No fighting, no big incident, at least on the surface. But what Prodigy said was not something that could be swallowed easily. It stayed there, smoldering, waiting to explode. And sooner or later, it would. That moment came not long after. Prodigy appeared on the remix of I Shot Ya by LL Cool J. In his verse, Prodigy had a line believed to take shots at Def Squad and Def Jam. It was sensitive enough that the official audio had to censor part of the word "def" to keep things from going out of control. The word was censored, but the meaning was not. It was a clear signal. The tension was not over. It was just waiting for a direct collision. And that collision happened at the Tunnel, the legendary New York club, a place that did not tolerate lingering misunderstandings. Keith Murray approached Prodigy, asked him directly, "Was that skit aimed at me?" Prodigy did not apologize, did not explain. According to fans and his own later accounts, Prodigy answered with just one line, "If the shoe fits, wear it." That was enough. Enough to make everything explode. Keith Murray threw a sudden punch. Prodigy went down in front of the crowd, under the lights, in front of eyes waiting to see what would happen next. Not on a record, not in a studio, but in real life, in front of police, in front of everyone's silence. For Prodigy, this was a deep humiliation. Not just because he was hit, but because he was hit off guard, and because it happened in front of a crowd. A punch not meant to kill, but to disgrace. He did not rush to retaliate right then. But the story did not end. It only changed form. Prodigy responded with music. In the long run, the hidden track on Hell on Earth, he retold the exact moment he was snuffed by Keith Murray. He rapped that if the police had not been nearby, things would have gone very differently. It was not bragging. It was a late warning, a way of saying that Punch had not closed anything. Keith Murray did not stay silent. He fired back with the track Call My Name on the album Enigma, a direct diss at Prodigy and Mobb Deep. Later on, Prodigy continued to mention Keith on the track Bad Blood in 2004. Keith, for his part, repeatedly told the story of punching Prodigy as an achievement, like a medal. Each man held on to his own version. Each man fed his own ego, and neither backed down. There was no official reconciliation, no final handshake. Both later became entangled in their own legal troubles. Keith Murray went to prison for another violent incident. Prodigy moved on with his career and new battles, not forgetting, just not saying much. For younger fans, this is now just a fragment of New York beef history from the 1990s. But for Prodigy, the punch at the tunnel was a very clear lesson. When you call someone fake, someone may choose to answer with a fist. And from that moment on, it is no longer rap. Saigon, the punch on stage. Do you know if you had to choose one young rapper, Prodigy never wanted to work with who it would be? It was Saigon. You did not hear wrong. The feud between Prodigy and Saigon did not begin with a famous diss record. It began with contempt very much Prodigy's style. Cold, direct, and unconcerned with how far the consequences might go. When asked about the younger generation of rappers at the time, including Saigon, Prodigy answered in a way that left no room to retreat. He said roughly that he did not like Saigon. In fact, he did not like almost anyone outside of Mobb Deep. Everyone else could suck my D.I. No context, no explanation, no diplomacy. To Prodigy, it was just honesty. To Saigon, it was a public slap. In New York, hip-hop being criticized by an older artist is normal. But being dismissed that way in the media was something else. Saigon did not see it as criticism. He saw it as humiliation, especially when he was at a stage where he needed recognition to move up. But that was only the first layer of the cause. The second layer was far more dangerous. Saigon was not alone. He was close friends with and closely associated with Tru Life. And between Tru Life and Prodigy, there already existed a very real, very dirty, very street-level feud. The studio raid Tru Life carried out against the Mobb Deep camp was not something that could be ignored. It was a collective insult, a declaration of real-life war. And in Prodigy's eyes, anyone standing next to Tru Life at that time could not be innocent. Saigon, even though he was not directly involved, was still pulled into that vortex. Not because of what he did, but because of which side he stood on. The tension simmered until the night of September 19, 2007 at SOB's in New York, a showcase that seemed ordinary. The lineup included Mobb Deep. It included Saigon. No one announced beforehand that the night would become one of the most chaotic moments in New York hip-hop of that period. Saigon was unexpectedly called on stage by Peter Rosenberg to perform. Everything happened fast. While Saigon was still holding the mic, Mobb Deep's crew and entourage began flooding the stage. No words were needed. Standing close enough was enough for everyone to understand where things were heading. Cameras captured the two sides arguing. No longer rap, no longer words. Just the distance between the two groups shrinking by the second. Saigon realized he was being surrounded. And in that moment, he made a decision that would later define the entire story. Saigon struck first. He punched Prodigy twice in the face. Not to win, not to prove anything. According to Saigon later, it was survival instinct. He saw the numbers were badly against him. He knew that if he waited a few more seconds, he would lose any chance to act. After the punches, chaos erupted. Saigon and the people with him were forced to run out of the club. Video footage showed him running while dodging people chasing from behind. There was no victory here, only chaos. Afterwards, Saigon wrote a blog post on MySpace. He spoke plainly. He said he struck first because he felt he was about to be surrounded. And when he hit and then ran, it was not cowardice. It was a survival tactic, an explanation without apology, without justification, just telling the truth as he saw it. But the consequences did not stop at SOBs. The Hot 97 logo appeared on the projection screen right as the fight broke out. And according to Saigon later, that was what made things far worse. Hot 97 was believed to have quietly banned his music for nearly a year. No announcement, no paperwork, just no airplay. For a rapper who needed radio support to push his career, that was almost an invisible suspended sentence. Saigon saw this as the heaviest blow to his career. Not the punch on stage, but what came after. When the phone stopped ringing, when shows became fewer, when people began to see him as a risk. As for Prodigy, he never spoke much about the incident. He did not recount details. He did not boast. He did not explain himself. To Prodigy, this was not a story to be proud of. It was just another point in a chain of clashes he saw as the result of disrespect. Years later, in interviews such as Vlad TV or Drink Champs Saigon spoke about Prodigy with a different attitude. No bitterness, no blame. He said he respected Prodigy, said he regretted not being able to reconcile before Prodigy passed away, and admitted that the feud was a mistake of youth, a moment that if he could relive it, he would choose differently. But hip-hop has no rewind button. For Prodigy, Saigon was not the greatest enemy, but he was clear proof of one thing. When rap leaves the studio and steps onto the stage when honor is threatened and the numbers behind each side are unbalanced, everything can spin out of control in just a few seconds. And the punch on the SOB's stage was the moment that reminded Prodigy that not every battle is decided by music. True life street-level humiliation. If Prodigy's earlier feuds still stayed within the boundaries of rap honor or ego clashes, then the story with Tru Life stepped into a completely different world. Darker, more dangerous, and most frightening because it was no longer symbolic at all. This was where hip-hop fell straight into the streets. Everything started from something that seemed very small, but in street culture, it was not something that could be taken lightly. Around 1999, according to Tru Life, and later reports by XXL Prodigy sold or gave Tru Life a verse to use for his own song. To Tru Life, this was a huge opportunity. A young rapper holding a verse from a Mobb Deep veteran was a ticket upward. But then things unfolded in the worst possible way. That same verse appeared on the soundtrack of the film Any Given Sunday. Tru Life's song was effectively dead. It could not be released. It could not be pushed. It could not be salvaged. In Tru Life's eyes, this was not coincidence. This was double dipping, making money twice off the same thing. And more importantly, it was disrespect. Tru Life tried to call Prodigy many times, calling to talk, to ask, to clarify. But according to his account, Prodigy and his camp did not respond. No answer, no explanation. That silence to Tru Life weighed heavier than being played. It meant being looked down on, especially when Mobb Deep were already established veterans and Tru Life was still coming up. For Tru Life, this was no longer about music. This was about face. Unable to resolve it by phone, Tru Life chose the method he believed was the only one that worked in his world: to teach Prodigy a street lesson. According to Tru Life himself and later materials such as Beef DVD and retrospective videos, one night, Tru Life and his people showed up carrying multiple firearms, pistols, shotguns, even an Uzi. They stormed straight into Mobb Deep's studio in Manhattan. No warning, no negotiation, no room for misunderstanding. Ironically, Prodigy and Havoc were not there at the time. In the studio were members and affiliates of infamous Mobb, along with producer The Alchemist and several others. But that did not stop Tru Life. Instead, it turned the incident into a collective humiliation. Tru Life's group beat people with gun stocks, robbed them, stripped some of them naked, forced them to run out into the street unclothed. A gun was even fired inside the studio. Not to kill, but to assert control. This was not a movie scene. This was a very clear message. The streets did not need Prodigy present to deliver it. Notably, GZA and DJ Muggs were also in the studio at the time. But Tru Life stated that he did not touch them. No words, no confrontation. That showed the sole target of the raid was not robbery, not meaningless violence, but Prodigy's people. Afterward, Prodigy almost never spoke in detail about this studio raid. In interviews, he avoided it, deflected questions, did not go deep, did not retell it. It was both a humiliation and a story with criminal implications. And more importantly, it was a truth Prodigy could not handle with rap. This incident also explains why Saigon, Tru Life's close friend and right-hand man, was almost automatically pulled into direct opposition with Mobb Deep. Even though Saigon did not participate in the raid, he was still seen as standing on the same side. And it was this underlying tension that created the atmosphere leading to the later fight between Saigon and Prodigy at SOBs. For many years, this feud had no ending, no apology, no reconciliation, until time and prison changed people. After Tru Life served an 8-year prison sentence for a separate fatal stabbing in a club unrelated to Mobb Deep, he was released in 2011. In 2016, a moment few expected occurred. Prodigy and Tru Life met on the rooftop of a building in New York. No guns, no crowds, no shouting. Just two men who had gone too far in the past. They took a photo together. XXL reported the moment. Prodigy wrote the caption, "Welcome home for Tru Life." Tru Life shared that maturity meant learning how to reconcile, not letting the past chain the future. But even with reconciliation, this story left a very clear mark on Prodigy's life. This was the only feud that could not be solved with rap, could not be resolved with diss tracks. It reminded Prodigy that there are limits, and once crossed, hip-hop is no longer a word game. It becomes street humiliation, and the price is always real. Crooked. Contempt from prison. If Prodigy's earlier feuds were tied to violence, honor, or street humiliation, then the story with Crooked, I carried a different tone. Not loud, not bloody, but bitter-aged and filled with the disillusionment of someone watching hip-hop drift away from what he once believed was its core. At that time, Prodigy was in prison for weapons possession. No stage, no studio, only time and bitterness. In that context, he wrote a letter, or more accurately, a blog post sent to Vibe. The content was not aimed at dissing a specific individual. It was a sweeping disappointment with the current state of hip-hop, but the flashpoint was Vibe.com's list of Best Rapper Alive 2008. Prodigy did not beat around the bush. He mentioned the figure of nearly 1 million votes and declared that if given the chance, he would slap every single one of them. Then he asked a question dripping with contempt. Who in their right mind would vote for Crooked I Flo Rida or Rich Boy? To Prodigy, Crooked Y's presence on that list was not just a mistake. It was proof that standards had collapsed. This was no longer a difference of opinion. It was a direct insult, a way of calling Crooked I whack without using the word. Crooked I did not stay silent. He responded with an online post expressing outrage and defending his rap skills. But the most attention-grabbing reaction was the challenge. Crooked I publicly invited Prodigy to a one-on-one fistfight when Prodigy got out of prison. No metaphor, no rap, a real-life appointment. But that meeting never happened. There was no evidence of any encounter. No punches were thrown. The beef stayed at the level of words and distant threats. It perfectly reflected the nature of this feud. No explosion, no escalation. Just two egos colliding through screens and text. Later, after Prodigy passed away, Crooked I changed his tone. He spoke with respect. He acknowledged Prodigy as an East Coast legend. No more challenges, no more bitterness. Only late recognition remained. For Prodigy, this feud was not about fearing Crooked I. It was about contempt for the version of hip-hop that elevated those names. It was the contempt of an older man in prison, looking out and realizing that the world he loved was no longer the same. Do you remember the opening question? If you had to choose one person Prodigy hated more than anyone else, who would it be? After moving through each story, each clash, each punch, each rap line, and even the moments of silence, the answer no longer seems simple. The closer you look, the clearer one thing becomes. Prodigy was not the kind of person who hated overchart positions. He did not hate because someone rapped better than him. Those things were never the core issue for Prodigy. What he could not tolerate was disrespect to honor, the feeling of being looked down on. The moment someone crossed a line, he considered untouchable. Some did it with images in front of tens of thousands of fans, some with reckless words, some with fists, and some by exploiting the system and turning their backs. Each name in this story touched Prodigy in a different way. None were the same, and none were simple enough to conclude who was the worst. Perhaps that is what Prodigy left behind, not a list of enemies, but an open question. In hip-hop, when honor is challenged, how do you respond? And if it were you, which name went too far?
We encourage viewers to approach the content with an open mind, critical thinking, and to always cross-reference with multiple sources in order to form their own perspective. That's the reality of the game. Fame always comes with a price. If you vibe with the content and want the real uncut stories, go ahead and smash that like button and subscribe to the Black Vault.